Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating world,
Oh,
the
yeah.
world of the princely states of India.
Okay.
And, this isn't just a history lesson, right?
Yeah.
This is like crucial to understand like how India, became India,
Right.
especially for our new UPSC aspirants out there tackling GS1 post-independence India.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hey, while we're at it, if you like these deep dives, uh, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell icon
Yes.
so you don't miss out on future episodes.
No.
Now, just imagine this,
Yeah.
okay?
All right.
It's India during the British Raj,
Okay.
but instead of one unified country, you have this incredibly complex
Yeah.
patchwork of directly ruled areas and then hundreds of
Right.
these semi-independent princely states.
It's like Game of Thrones, but with treaties and viceroys.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Yeah.
So for our listeners who are, new to this whole thing,
Yeah.
could you maybe give us like a little background on these princely states? What were they and how did they kind of fit into the whole picture of British India?
Well, you got to remember that before the Brits, established complete control over India,
Right.
the subcontinent was essentially just like a mosaic of different kingdoms and
Sure.
territories.
Yeah.
As the British East India Company expanded its influence,
Right.
they adopted a variety of strategies
Okay.
to deal with these existing power structures.
Interesting.
Princely states were essentially those kingdoms
Right.
that were allowed to retain some degree of autonomy.
Okay, so like not completely independent,
Right.
but also not directly under British rule.
Exactly.
Sounds like a very delicate balancing act.
Yes.
How did the British even like maintain control over so many different states?
Well, it evolved over time.
Okay.
Early on, the Brits were really concerned with just,
Yeah.
establishing a foothold
Right.
and fighting off rivals
Right.
like the Marathas.
Gotcha.
So they came up with this policy called ring fence.
Ring fence.
Yeah, basically creating buffer states around their core territories.
So like a protective barrier.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it. So like a real world example of that.
Well, prime example is Awad.
What?
The British forced them to keep a big army, supposedly for their own protection,
Mm-hmm.
but this army was under British command and paid for by Awad.
So it was like a win-win for the Brits.
Yeah, this drained Awad's resources and made them rely on the British for military support.
It sounds like the British were really good at turning these states into like their own personal piggy banks.
Absolutely. As the British consolidated their power,
Yeah.
they realized they needed more direct control.
Yeah.
And that's where the subsidiary alliance system comes in.
This is the big one,
Yeah.
right? The one you always see in the textbooks.
Exactly. A must-know for your UPSC folks.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Can you break it down for us?
Sure. The subsidiary alliance,
Yeah.
introduced by Lord Wellesley,
Okay.
genius from the British perspective,
Right.
it made these states dependent on them for security. So a state that signed on to this alliance
Yeah.
had to disband their own army
Really?
and accept a British force on their land, which of course they had to pay for.
So they were losing control of their own defense.
Exactly. And their foreign policy, they couldn't make any alliances without British consent.
Wow.
And they had to have a British resident at their court.
So basically puppets with the British pulling the strings.
Yeah. The Nizam of Hyderabad was the first to sign.
Right, in 1798.
Yes, setting a precedent for others to follow.
It's wild how the British just kind of shifted their whole relationship with these states over time, from creating buffer zones to making them completely dependent.
Yeah.
I mean, did the rulers just accept this? There had to be some pushback, right?
Of course there was resentment.
Yeah.
But the British were clever. They tightened their control gradually.
Right.
And remember, they weren't dealing with one unified entity.
Right.
Each princely state had its own internal dynamics, ambitions, rivalries.
Yeah.
The British exploited those divisions masterfully.
Classic divide and rule.
Precisely.
So, but how did this affect the everyday people living in these states?
Oh, it did. Absolutely.
Yeah.
These policies weren't just political maneuvers.
Right.
They had real consequences.
Okay.
Like the financial burdens of the subsidiary alliances often led to higher taxes and hardship for the common people.
Right.
And then there's the doctrine of lapse, which added another layer of insecurity.
Ah, the doctrine of lapse.
Another one for the UPSC notebook.
Absolutely.
This is where things get really ruthless.
Okay, tell us about it.
Basically, if a ruler died without a natural heir,
Yeah.
the state would be annexed by the British.
So if you didn't have a son to inherit the throne, your whole kingdom could be taken away.
Exactly. It caused a lot of anxiety among the rulers.
I bet.
And it fueled resentment against the British.
Right.
Many Indians saw it as a blatant land grab. It,
Yeah.
it eroded any trust that might have existed.
It's like the British were just squeezing these states tighter and tighter.
That's a good analogy. And this control went beyond military and political matters.
Okay.
They started meddling in the internal affairs of these states, too.
Really?
Yeah, using their residents to interfere in everything.
Wow.
Succession disputes, administration, even social reforms.
So it was about shaping life in these states.
Exactly. And they had a powerful tool infrastructure.
Right.
They built railways, telegraph lines, irrigation systems,
Right.
all designed to give them more control.
Like a web they were weaving.
Precisely. Imagine you're a ruler,
Yeah.
and British officials are suddenly dictating how you manage salt production or what coins you can mint.
It's like a constant reminder that you're not really in charge. It
Exactly.
must have been so frustrating.
It was. And then they introduced the Imperial Service Scheme,
What was that?
another clever tactic
Cook?
to integrate the princely states into their military.
No.
The rulers could keep their own troops,
Okay.
but they were trained and equipped by the British
Right.
and could be called upon to serve British interests.
So they were co-opting these armies for their own purposes.
Exactly. It was a very calculated system designed to ensure British dominance.
Wow. But all this control, all this manipulation,
Yeah.
it had to have some consequences, right?
Yeah.
Did the people just sit back and accept all this?
Well, there was a growing sense of unrest.
Yeah.
And this was fueled by the rising tide of nationalism
Right.
sweeping across India in the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
Okay.
The idea of self-rule, of throwing off the yoke of British imperialism.
Yeah.
It wasn't just in British India.
Right.
It was in the princely states, too.
So, like a parallel struggle for freedom?
Absolutely. These states weren't immune to it.
So this rising nationalist sentiment.
Yeah.
Okay. How did that actually manifest? Like did they form their own political
Oh,
organizations?
absolutely.
Okay.
We see the rise of these groups called Prajamandals
Prajamandals.
or state people's conferences.
So,
Basically grassroots movements demanding democratic reforms and more autonomy.
so it's like mini independence movements.
Exactly.
Within these states.
Yeah.
What kind of demands were they making?
Well, it varied from state to state,
Okay.
but the common themes were things like responsible government,
Okay.
elected legislatures, right to free speech, free association,
Got it.
an end to feudal practices.
So they wanted a say in how they were governed.
Yeah, just like the nationalists in British India
Right.
demanding self-rule.
Were there any key figures in these Prajamandals that our UPSC folks should know about?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
One prominent figure is Maniklal Kathari,
Manical Cathari.
a tireless advocate for democratic reforms.
Right.
He played a big role in organizing the All India States People's Conference,
Okay.
which brought together representatives from various Prajamandals.
So they were coordinating on a national level?
Exactly, to present a united front.
That's pretty impressive.
It was.
So what about the Indian National Congress? What was their stance on all this? Did they support these Prajamandals?
At first, they were a bit hesitant. They were focused on independence from the British
Right.
and didn't want to spread themselves too thin.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it was already a huge undertaking.
Exactly. Plus, they didn't want to antagonize the rulers unnecessarily.
Right, but they couldn't just ignore these states completely, right?
Not really, especially with this growing nationalist sentiment.
Exactly.
Over time, the Congress realized that the fate of the princely states was
Mhm.
linked to the future of India.
Okay.
A free India wouldn't be truly free if these states remained under autocratic rule.
So their stance evolved.
It did.
Okay, how so?
They started advocating for the people in the princely states
Okay.
and even supported specific movements.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
A good example is Gandhi's support for the Vaikom Satyagraha in Travancore.
Okay.
That was a movement against untouchability and caste discrimination.
So they were committed to equal rights for all Indians.
Yes, regardless of where they lived.
Right.
This shift was also influenced by the realization that the British were trying to use the princely states against them.
Okay, how so?
Well, in 1935,
Yeah.
the British passed the Government of India Act,
Okay.
which proposed a federation
Okay.
that would include both British India and the princely states.
Gotcha.
But here's the catch.
Yeah.
Representatives from the princely states would be nominated by the rulers.
Oh, so not elected by the people.
Exactly.
It's divide and rule tactic.
They were hoping to maintain their influence,
Right.
even if they gave some self-rule to British India.
Clever. But the Congress didn't fall for it?
Nope. They opposed the federation.
Okay.
They argue that all representatives should be elected.
Makes sense. So what happened then? Did this federation idea just disappear?
It never really got going.
Okay.
World War II broke out and the focus shifted,
Right.
but the debate about the princely states continued.
Okay.
And in 1939, a crucial event took place.
Okay.
The Ludhiana session of the All India States People's Conference.
The Ludhiana session. Why was this one so important?
It marked a turning point in the relationship between the Congress and the princely states.
Okay.
Jawaharlal Nehru, who was president of the Congress at the time,
Right.
he presided over the session
Yeah.
and gave a powerful speech where he said, "Freedom is indivisible."
Freedom is indivisible.
He made it clear that the fight for independence included the people and the princely states.
It was a statement of solidarity.
Absolutely.
So their fates were intertwined.
Yes. The Ludhiana session cemented that alliance.
Between the Congress and the Prajamandals.
Exactly. They sent a message to the British.
That they were all in this together.
Right.
Things were really starting to heat up then.
Yeah, the Congress was getting more involved.
Yeah.
The Prajamandals were gaining strength.
Right.
And the British were losing their grip.
So what was the next big turning point in this whole story?
Well, in 1942,
Yeah.
the Quit India movement was launched.
Quit India.
And this had a huge impact on the princely states.
Right. Quit India was a massive moment.
It was.
How did it affect the princely states?
It pushed people in those states to join the fight for complete independence
Okay.
before Quit India.
Yeah.
The focus was mostly on reforms within the states.
Right.
But after the demand shifted to full integration with a free India.
So it became about joining a larger fight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was no longer just about improving things within their own states.
Right.
It was about uniting with the rest of India.
So this is a critical moment.
It is.
The British are on their way out.
Yeah.
India is on the verge of independence.
Right.
And the princely states are in this really precarious position. What happens next? How does this integration actually play out?
It was a messy situation.
Yeah, I bet. So the British are leaving. And
Right.
what happens to all these princely states?
Well, the British weren't exactly known for their graceful exits.
Right. Always got to stir the pot one last time.
Exactly. With the lapse of British paramountcy, they basically said to the rulers,
Yeah.
okay, you're on your own now. You
Yeah.
can choose to join India or Pakistan or stay independent.
So they were giving them the option to break away from India?
Yep. They were hoping to leave a fragmented India behind.
That's just plain dirty.
It was a classic divide and rule tactic.
So what happened? Did anyone actually try to go their own way?
Oh, yeah, there were a few holdouts.
Okay.
But thankfully, India had Sardar Patel.
Right. The Iron Man of India.
He was instrumental in integrating these states.
What was his approach?
Patel was a master negotiator.
Okay.
He understood the importance of a unified India.
Yeah.
He used a combination of diplomacy and a firm hand.
So like a carrot and stick approach.
You could say that.
Were there any states that really pushed back against integration?
Yeah, a few, like Travancore, Junagadh,
Yeah.
and Hyderabad.
What happened with them?
Patel made it very clear that integration was the best option
Right.
for the states and for the people.
And did they eventually agree?
Most of them did peacefully,
Okay.
but there were some instances where military action was necessary.
Really? Like
Oh.
where?
Well, take Junagadh, for example.
Okay.
The ruler wanted to join Pakistan even though it was surrounded by Indian territory.
That's a bit awkward.
Patel wasn't having it.
Yeah.
He sent in troops and a plebiscite was held.
Okay.
The people voted overwhelmingly to join India.
So it was a mix of diplomacy and force.
It was a delicate balancing act.
Yeah. And of course there's Kashmir.
Yes, the ongoing issue.
That's a whole other story.
It is. But for the most part,
Yeah.
Patel's efforts were successful.
It's incredible how they managed to bring all these different states together.
It was a remarkable achievement.
It really speaks to the leadership at the time.
And the desire for unity among the people.
So for our UPSC aspirants, this whole saga of the princely states is essential knowledge.
Absolutely. It covers so many important themes.
Power politics, diplomacy, nationalism.
It's a fascinating chapter in India's history.
And it's still relevant today.
It reminds us of the challenges of nation building.
And the importance of strong leadership.
And the need to protect our hard-won freedom.
Well, that's about it for our deep dive into the princely states of India.
We've covered a lot of ground.
From British rule to integration.
It's been quite a journey.
If you're new to the deep dive, welcome.
We're glad to have you.
And if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that like button.
And subscribe.
And ring the bell icon for more.
Until next time, keep exploring.
And keep those brains buzzing.